A ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran appears shaky after last night's 11th hour agreement. Earlier today, U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth said America is ready to restart the war, quote, at a moment's notice.
It takes time sometimes for ceasefires to take hold. We're watching it. We're prepared.
State-controlled media in Iran was filled with images of people celebrating long into the night following news of the ceasefire, but there is cautious optimism in other parts of the Middle East. Both Kuwait and Qatar have reported Iranian attacks since the truce was announced. And today, Israel launched its heaviest attacks of the war against what it says are Hezbollah targets. Lebanon's Civil Defense Service says those strikes killed 254 people. That would be the highest single-day death toll in the Israel-Hezbollah war. Another 1,100 people were wounded in these strikes. Iran says it closed the Strait of Hormuz again in response to those attacks. And journalist Nick Harper is watching the reaction from the United States and tell us what they're saying in Washington about the state of the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, Ian, at the end of the first full day of this ceasefire, the US and Iran seem to be completely at odds. And part of the problem is that their understanding, their interpretation of the situation and how the Strait of Hormuz is going forward is very contrasted. Now, bear in mind, earlier on, the Iranians were saying that the strait was closed, and there also was reporting that they were threatening to fire on any ships bypassing the Strait of Hormuz without permission. If you listen to the White House, though, the interpretation of this situation, what is currently ongoing, is the polar opposite. The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, was asked about this earlier. She said that the Strait of Hormuz was open. She said that any reporting of it being closed was simply false. And she also said that there had been an uptick in traffic, the number of ships bypassing that channel. Let's listen to what else she had to say when she was asked about it by reporters earlier.
Again, this is a case of what they're saying publicly is different privately. We have seen an uptick of traffic in the Strait today, and I will reiterate the President's expectation and demand that the Strait of Hormuz is reopened immediately, quickly, and safely. That is his expectation. It has been relayed to him privately that is what's taking place, and these reports publicly are false.
And Donald Trump has also been speaking about the Strait of Hormuz. He seems to view it as a business opportunity. He said that there was big money to be made, and he talked about this idea that hasn't been discussed so far of a, in his words, joint venture with the Iranians, potentially splitting this toll money that up until now the Iranians have been imposing on ships, a $2 million price tag. Donald Trump wants a piece of that pie, suggesting that potentially, if there is a toll, the United States would like to collect some of it as well. Ian?
And what are the next steps for the United States in Iran?
Well, Donald Trump certainly seems to suggest that the United States will be around for some time. He said that the US would be just hanging around in order to make sure that everything goes well. He also spoke about the uranium, said the US would be digging it up. That uranium that he said was buried deep underground as a result of US airstrikes. And the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has also suggested that US troops would remain in the region. But will any of this be possible? Because there is this confusion and contrasting views. We heard from the Vice President, J.D. Vance, earlier, and he said that simply at this stage, there seemed to be a misunderstanding about how things were being interpreted.
I think this comes from a legitimate misunderstanding. I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise. We never indicated that was going to be the case. What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran, and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states. Now, that said, the Israelis, as I understand it, again, I'm supposed to get a fuller report when I get on the plane, have actually offered to be, frankly, to check themselves a little bit in Lebanon because they want to make sure that our negotiation is successful.
So the Vice President suggesting that Iran is quite simply confused about the terms of this ceasefire. So the next question is, will we even get to the beginning of the talks? The first round due to begin on Saturday in Islamabad. At this stage, with the Iranians saying that the US has violated multiple terms of the agreement, it may be a little difficult to even get to the point where they'll be sitting down to discuss next steps. Ian?
Journalist Nick Harper in Washington. Thank you. Officials in Lebanon say Israeli airstrikes today killed 254 people. That is the highest single-day death toll yet in the Israel-Hezbollah war. Iran says it has now closed the Strait of Hormuz in response. This comes after Iran's 11th-hour deal with the United States and Israel. The U.S. says it expects to see the strait reopen. Well, to weigh in on the implications of all of this, let's turn now to Kamran Bokhari, a senior resident fellow with the Middle East Policy Council in Washington. He is in Purcellville, Virginia. Kamran, 24 hours ago, we were live on this program, wondering if we were going to be reporting on a countdown to Trump's threat to wipe out an entire civilization. But then, as I mentioned, that 11th hour agreement between Iran, Israel, and the United States. How do you feel about the state of that promised ceasefire as of right now?
So thanks for having me on, Ian. Look, there are a couple of things. Number one is anytime you reach a ceasefire, in the early days, it's very fragile. There are always violations by one side or another. And in this case, we're dealing with a really complicated situation. So you have the U.S. Iranian conflict, and then you also have the Israel-Iranian conflict. Now, there's a lot of convergence between Washington and Jerusalem, but there are also differences in how Israel and the United States look at the conflict. So this is a complicated situation. And then, of course, the fact that Pakistan is being used as a conduit for these negotiations adds a further layer of complexity. And so by the time, you get everybody on the same page, it's not really clear that everybody agrees with everything. So I look at this as sort of part of the process.
Kind of curious about Israel's thinking in launching an attack with what we're told is the largest loss of life during their incursion, or whatever you want to call it, in Lebanon against Hezbollah. Which, not surprisingly, has put pressure on this ceasefire. What do you think Israel's strategy is here?
Well, look, I think from an Israeli point of view, there is the war with Iran. But from an Israeli point of view, Hezbollah is more closer to home and has far greater ability to strike. And now, since 2024, Israel has significantly weakened Hezbollah, and it's trying to wrap that up, that whole process, trying to take it to a logical conclusion, but it faces constraints because the United States is trying to reach an understanding, a settlement with Iran. Iran is tied to Hezbollah. So this is the complexity here. That interests always don't converge, they diverge. And then if you look at what the Iranian situation is, they're in a difficult position. On one hand, they can't be seen as throwing their premier proxy, Hezbollah, under the bus. But if they try to say, hey, this ceasefire is off, then they risk further destruction of their infrastructure and whatnot. Quite frankly, they came to the table yesterday because obviously the threat from the president of the United States, and they can't assume he's not going to follow through with it.
You've explained this so clearly, the complexity of what's going on right now with Iran, Israel, and the United States. And so that complexity is, kind of the backdrop for the days leading up to what are supposed to be negotiations on Saturday. Do you have any sense of confidence of whether those negotiations will even begin on Saturday?
Great question. So there are two ways to look at it. There's one way is that, hey, these ceasefire violations are adding to the fragility of the situation. And so it's not beyond the realm of possibility or even probability that they decide that, hey, we don't want to meet just yet. Okay. But at the same time, another way of looking at it is what is the priority? What is the imperative of the Iranians? At some point, as I was saying earlier, they have to sort of decide, do they want to go to war again and risk further degradation of their infrastructure? See, one of the things that to bear in mind from an Iranian point of view is they can take the destruction of their offensive capabilities and live with it. What they can't live with is if infrastructure is struck, that creates internal social economic chaos, and that threatens the regime. That's something that's a red line. When all is said and done, they want to get to the other side of this more or less intact. And so there's this sort of difficult decision making, but I think that the imperative will constrain Iran from completely calling off these talks.
So nice to have your perspective on this. Kamran Bokhari, a senior resident fellow with the Middle East Policy Council in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.